Hey you guys, this is Richard Sachs. How are you doing? I'm your host on Lost Arts Radio Live for Saturday, May 18th, 2019. And the first thing I have to tell you tonight is that it's Lost Arts Radio Live because we're always live. Except tonight we're not. You're seeing me from Tuesday, 4 days ago. So it's not live. So I have to be at a conference on the day that you're listening to this, so this is the closest that we could get. I apologize for that. So we can't say a lot in detail about what ended up happening during the past week here. But, you know, it's not all bad. We've got some good things happening. The U.S. president is finally showing some movement against the two areas where he's really been blocked. One has been the censorship issue, which is critical not only for the 2020 election, but also for just the dissemination of knowledge. It's all being blocked. Anything that's real health information, real science on the biosphere, the weather, the atmosphere, anything that would tell you the truth about situations that really affect your life, those are all being blocked. And they're being blocked by a combination of social media and the big corporate television newspaper conglomerate. The first major move, other than the president's order for free speech on campuses being allowed, college campuses, university campuses, now there's something that came up in the Supreme Court it may have been even today, or yesterday, I think it was yesterday, which would put it on Monday, that the Supreme Court that said Apple could be sued for a number of transgressions against, being a monopoly and a number of things that they're doing that make their functioning illegal as a censoring monopoly. So that's being challenged, or it will be challenged now by a lot of different plaintiffs, including some that we know about and you would recognize, and we'd get shut down at the moment for mentioning them. But that's being good. The president also is taking the first $1 billion or $1.5 billion from the Defense Department that was allocated for Afghanistan and going to use it to protect the southern border of the U.S., which is really good. I mean, it should be 10 times, 15 times that much money, but it's a start. And he always had the money there available anytime without consulting Congress. It's a national emergency that's easily verifiable, should not be a partisan issue at all. It isn't. In fact, as you know from what we've talked about, none of these issues are partisan. That's just total nonsense. They're either toward tyranny or toward freedom, toward taking care of the people who live in your country or not. This diversion that it's partisan is just really strange. So I thought for this week we try something a little bit different, since I didn't get to see what was happening on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday before making this recorded show. So I thought, why don't we take a step back, and in spite of the good things that I'm telling you have shown that they could be developing now, and there's a lot of people backing not only the U.S. president, he's not good because he's perfect and he knows everything. He's good because of his motive, which is actually to help the citizens of his country. And this kind of thing is arising partly because of the inspiration of his example in places like Brazil, Italy, even in Denmark, where we just had a great person running for member of parliament on the show on Sunday, and Eastern Europe, Russia, places around the world. And this is a good sign. But overall, there's still a lot that has to be corrected. So I thought for this week, let's step back and take a look. And it just kind of like wondering what a visitor from another planet or another galaxy who was wise and benevolent and just wanted the benefit of humanity and life on our planet, what they would think if they came and observed for a little while. And, it could be that if they did that, they'd send a message back to their planet saying something like, assuming it was translated into English, right? That we found a race of humanoids. Humanoids meaning we don't have the full qualities of humans, being wisdom and caring about each other and caring about the life support system of the planet, things like that. We're not really showing those kind of signs of intelligence yet, but we look kind of human. And could say something like this: we've discovered a race of humanoids who look almost normal, but they display a set of characteristics that are rarely seen on the planets that we've observed. And the reason is that usually these races only appear briefly when they look like we look right now. And they tend to self-destruct before we can find them. If we discover them in time, we observe and study them without any perceivable presence that they could detect, as we don't want to intrude or in any way. But the humanoids referenced here are described as looking almost normal, because they all seem, but almost because they all seem to carry this strange tension or slight discomfort with them all the time, which we're trying to understand. This is what a statement by a visiting other species or race might sound like in the beginning. So what are they talking about? What this constant tension and discomfort that they would notice right away? Where does it originate and what does it mean? And the idea would be that we, called the humanoids, are not aware of who we are at all. And that's where the discomfort comes from, that we're not physical bodies. It's like a woman or a man thinking that they are the clothes they're wearing. They're not really the clothes they're wearing. They're the person underneath. And in the case of humans, or humanoids as the visitors might call us because of how we act, we don't know that we're beings of formless, pure consciousness. We don't even know what that means. And so our limitless abilities are not functional, and unconditional love, caring for each other, that's all dormant. Somehow we become unconscious of who we are. And those of you who don't think that's relevant to world news, you're not understanding the bigger picture. So to compensate for not being aware of who we are, we've assumed temporary false identities based on characteristics of the physical body. That's where the whole stupid race thing comes from, which is, it's way beyond stupid. Even on a physical level, humans look to have originated all in southern Africa and migrated to different parts of the world. And the body's conscious and intelligent. It adapts to different environments, different food sources, and things like that. Ends up looking different after thousands of generations. But these fake identities that the current human beings like us have taken on, they're all not just based on how the body looks, but also on ideas and philosophies of all kinds, or group affiliations that are perfect for fighting over. And it's not, to say it's not a sign of intelligence is an understatement. It's a subhuman life form. It's not because of who we really are, but because of walking around in a trance, not knowing that and not being that in practice. So we hold on to these so desperately that many of us are willing to harm or kill each other to prove that we're right, the other person is wrong, and it's over disagreements on whose beliefs are right, or whose group that they're connected to is better than the other one. And you can certainly see this taking place all over the world constantly. A visitor from another planet where they were actually somewhat conscious would just stare in amazement. How could these incredible beings have degenerated to this extent? And you can see that the love of conflict and defense of ingrained or imagined realities is enough to explain why all the life on the planet of this species that they call human is in danger of becoming extinct. And it's not just the humans at this point. A lot of the technologies that we're playing with, like the ones that we've had the great guests on the Sunday show recently, like the 5G situation, it doesn't just wipe out humans. It's been clearly shown to wipe out insects, microorganisms, birds, trees. We had Mark Steele on a little while ago showing that damage to trees was occurring where these covert 5G antennas were being installed on streetlights in the northern UK. And that's a show that I would recommend everybody to take a look at when you get time, Lost Arts Radio with Mark Steele. And he is doing a test case in his own town in northern England, I think it's near the border of Scotland, and showing that the town is doing these things knowingly, creating health and life hazard to the people in the town, not to mention the other life forms, and finding a way that he thinks they can be successfully beaten in court. We'll find out what happens with that. But there's much more than just the love of conflict that endangers our species and all the other life forms. One is that we're so highly suggestible that we've somehow fallen under the control of this program. It's like a dark game trying to manipulate our belief systems and our thought patterns and all that. Many think David Icke has talked about it coming from a non-physical level of life forms, and I and others think that he's correct. They're sometimes referred to as 4D or lower fourth dimensional life forms that, to people who don't have any discrimination, can appear like really wonderful beings because they can do things that appear to be supernatural and stuff like that. But well, a tree by its fruit, but you also, if you become perceptive and just begin to become conscious, you don't care whether somebody does amazing things on the outside. You care who they are and what their intent is, benevolent or harmful. So these beings, if that's where it's coming from, and as I say, David Icke has made a strong case for it, and so have others, and my impression from the research that I've done is that it's true. The game that they're playing is 4 steps, basically. Hypnotize, control, corrupt and sicken is number 3, and exterminate is number 4. It's not a population reduction end game. That's a step on the way. So I agree with Mike, as we've talked about before, that as the Georgia Guidestones indicate, there isn't an agenda to reduce the population to 500 million or lower, but that's not the end game. The end game is complete extermination of humans and all other life forms. So if somebody was looking at this who was fully human, and whether they look like human beings or not is not really important. It's their consciousness. If that was developed more than ours, they would see us not as physical beings, but as formless beings wearing costumes, sentient, conscious, self-aware costumes, but costumes nevertheless. And they accurately would not even really call us light. They'd call us beings of consciousness that light came from. And there's a difference there, but most of our species are unaware of it. So we keep falling under the spell of these people that are playing the game. And what you see coming out of it is world events. This is going on for many thousands of years. And those beings that we mentioned, they set up the game in the following way. I'm going to try to just say a few things about it. They can take control of some of the what we were calling humanoids at the top levels in the high positions of power on our planet. And they really like the ones that have no moral sense of what is right and don't care about that at all. They would do anything for power, and they're willing to, kill and steal and have people die of starvation and cause incredible deprivation. And they find lots of those people, and you can see that, the results of that, and you can see it happening in the world, that there are so many of us that willing to sell out humanity and ourselves for the sake of money and power. So it's not hard for them to find these people, and they've been finding them for thousands of years. They've been operating in the same way in civilizations that had very low technology, and some not remembered that had very advanced technologies. You have these people in positions of power that are just there to advance themselves, and they can be very intelligent as far as strategy goes, and cleverness and deceptiveness and things like that, lying effectively. But where they're not intelligent is they have no concept that everybody is accountable for everything that we do. Not because there's some authority figure or even nasty God who's going to catch us and punish us, but your own consciousness catches absolutely everything. And since that came from a place of harmony, and it's always pulling toward that healing and harmony energy. That's how cuts heal on your finger or anything else in your body. If it's going to heal, that's what heals it. Not a doctor. Not even a natural doctor can heal anything. They can support the healing energy in the body, but that's about it. They can't do the healing. If the life force stops supporting, then the person's gone from that body, no matter what kind of doctor they have. So, out of the people that are found that are willing to sell out humanity and use their position of power for destruction, there are some among those, and David and others recognize this, that are interested in pursuing destruction and pain and suffering and death for their own sake. Not necessarily for money even, but just because they want to please this. I mean, I know this sounds really weird. I'm sorry, but as long as we're at the moment still on the air, I need to share this with you, and you can digest it and do what you want with it, or discard it, whatever you feel. But this is what I think is going on behind the scenes, and they're looking for those people that don't necessarily need the money motivation to do it. They want pain for its own sake. And these are like the prized servants and followers of the ones in control. And they do it in the name of Satan or Lucifer. It's actually done that way. I mean, you see that referred to even in the writings of people like Alinsky and others who want to destroy society, but we're talking much higher level right now. And they put these people who are real devotees in the top positions of power in the human world, and they teach them how to construct this very complex, multi-layered machine of destruction. And again, I'm not saying this to be negative. I'm not pessimistic. But I'm just being realistic about what our strategic awareness would show if we were awake. And hopefully we're on the way to becoming like that. And so they show them the incredible detail of this machine of destruction, and the humans who are their followers follow it to the letter as much as they can. And they in turn control the people running governments and big corporations. Not, these companies, the corporations, they're not evil because they're corporations, because you can make a corporation to do anything, as I'm sure you know. You can make a corporation to do some great project that's going to help humanity. I'm talking about the corporations, most of them larger global corporations that are all operating in amazing coordination and collusion right now. And where you really see that is when there's a targeted individual, like Dr. Labo was years ago during the Ebola event in Western Africa. And that was Ebola that was created in a lab, most likely under a patent of CDC owning the disease and the solution to it. And Dr. Labo, they let it out of the lab. I'm sure they would say it was accidental. I don't believe that. But that's what this problem supposedly was. Just somehow got out of this inadequate security they had and working on a highly weaponized Ebola just to experiment and see what it would do to people and if it was let out for a while. And right before that, before they let it out, they had proven in a military report that was classified and then probably by mistake declassified. And it said that it could be stopped at any time with no downside, no bad effects on the body, really no problems. And the medicine they used for it was 10 parts per million nanosilver. And Dr. Labo has been a guest on our show quite a few times on Sundays. You can go back. Those archives are all available free. And she discovered that report. I forget which of the multitude of military departments it was from. And they said, yeah, it stopped at 100%, 10 parts per million nanosilver. So anytime we want to manage this outbreak and stop it, well, here's how to do it. It's really, really cheap. It's water with a little bit of small particles of silver in it. Not colloidal, but nano, which is a smaller particle version. So Dr. Labo says, well, wow, this is great. She knew it was probably on purpose that they weren't making this available to the public, so she decided to send some over there and announced it publicly on air. So right away, she started getting attacked by her bank, which I think was Chase, and they froze her money. Air France, which was supposed to be taking the nanosilver over to African countries where they needed it, was told, I think by the WHO, to sidetrack that shipment and warehouse it, which they did. And they also notified the leaders of the countries that were affected in West Africa and said, if you experiment at all with nanosilver, horrible things are going to happen to your country. You'll lose all your financing for your projects and on, probably intimating that they'd be in physical danger as well. And they had just finished this big PR program saying, we've got to stop this Ebola outbreak. It's the biggest danger that we've ever had. And anything that you can do for your people, try any experimental drug you can, knowing that those wouldn't do any good, of course, and they'd make things worse. But then with the prospect of a real solution, they warned them that under no circumstances were they able to experiment with it at all. And in the end, they did get some to the people, Dr. Labo did, but it had to be basically brought in privately and very carefully. So those are the people running these organizations like WHO, CDC, WTO, so many other organizations, governments. Now it's permeated to such a degree that it's in places like the U.S. and most other major countries down to the local level. And the people in control of those agencies, they direct the ones lower down in the control system, basically just educating them, miseducating them in a way that makes them unable to see that they're learning lies. And this is the whole educational system now for the most part. They're unable to use common sense and to see what's right in front of them. And you can see how well that incredible education system is working, because you take something like the spraying in the atmosphere, which was just on a show of Alex's yesterday with Mike on there too. I'm not mentioning their last names because we don't want to be banned quite yet if we can avoid it. And they're saying, yeah, there's all these witnesses that have come out and explained it, and there have been scientists that have caught the residue that these planes are spraying, aluminum, barium, strontium, and a lot more that are toxic ingredients. And most of the population walks around all day and doesn't see anything unusual happening, even though they're being subject to an air raid in their own country, right over their own heads in real time. And I don't know of any politicians, other than some people in the state of Rhode Island recently, and I don't know how far that got, that will say anything about this project that's going on. If you want to be real respectful and make it sound official, you can call it geoengineering. Other people call it chemtrails, but the name doesn't matter. It's what it is, and it's an attempt to poison the whole world, and it's going just fine at the moment, with no resistance that we can tell. Anyway, I'm talking about the educational system, and education's a super valuable thing. I really recommend it to everybody, regardless of age. It has nothing to do with your age. You should keep it up for your whole life as much as you possibly can, and don't rely on experts, because what if experts don't tell you the truth? Then you're completely misled and you don't even know what's happening around you. So you have to educate yourself, be your own school teacher, take care of your kids, because if you put them in the hands of a school where they are given all this crazy misinformation, and now they're injecting them with poison injections through hollow, and this sounds impossible, but they really are doing that. They're privately and secretly counseling them that their gender may be incorrect, that they need chemical poisons to block their normal hormones. I mean, they're doing incredibly horrible things to kids in school now, and you have to be very careful. They want to make it so that they control homeschooling as well, of course, because that's a big loophole, where kids are still coming out bright and alert and not chemically, lobotomized and things like that, not injected with things, but they're after that. They've almost got it accomplished in California. Hopefully that won't happen. But many of the people who are victims of the educational system, they come out believing that they're actually doing good, serving the world, and they're just totally blinded by their so-called education, in quotes, and there's endless examples of that. Doctors in medical school memorizing these vast amounts of information, and they get confused. They think, understandably, that we're in medical school learning, right? All this information we learned, and they missed one little problem with that, in that they're not learning, they're memorizing. Memorizing is okay in its place after you've learned the reason for what you're memorizing and that it's actually true. But if you just memorize and you really don't have any way of knowing if you're memorizing stuff that's true or not, then it turns into a weapon against understanding. So that's why people are coming out blinded by their education, all the way from preschool programming up until high school and college and university and PhD level training, medical school, high degree of programming, brainwashing, memorizing of false information, and doing it in a really interesting way that is connected to an ego attachment. So you're programmed that if anybody disagrees with you and calls into question what you've learned, then you have to demean them and attack them, and if you're a doctor, throw them out of your medical practice, and anybody else has to be have their character assassinated, stuff like that. But they're all doing it based on their own total hypnosis. And the programs that the bosses of these people are carrying out are pretty shocking if you're not aware of them. Even if you are aware of them on the surface, and remember how this would look to an extraterrestrial species that was wise and benevolent, visiting and looking at what's going on this planet. And all of us get dulled to it because we're living in the middle of it. And we need to shake off that complacency and look at it for what it is, like we're seeing it for the first time. It gives us a better perspective and lets us know what our options are of what we can do. We can give a few examples. These are some of the ones that the off-planet observers might take note of right away and be just totally blown away, really, that the population had no clue of what they're in the middle of and what they consider normal, that The first one is probably what we already mentioned, the geoengineering, and I've heard speeches on the internet and on TV shows and things by experts that we could name that were saying, well, sometime in the future, there was a guest on Colbert's show, I think it might have been David Keith or somebody like that, and he was saying, sometime in the future, to save the world, we high-level scientists are considering that we probably will have to spray millions of tons of sulfuric acid into the atmosphere to fight global warming. We wouldn't do it now, and we're just considering some small-scale tests. But, we might have to do this. And Colbert asked him, what would it do to people's health? And what if your pilot studies showed on how this would affect people? And they said, well, we haven't actually done any studies. That may not be true. What he means is no studies that they tell us about. All the agencies that say they've done no studies, I tend to think that's false. They've done the studies. They just don't feel like sharing the results. And they've done the studies because they wanted to know what's going to happen. And he said, well, it probably would only kill like 10,000 people a year, not a big deal. That's out of 7 billion, that's nothing. And the host told him, well, I think it's already going on. Did you see the white lines behind the airplanes? And they don't dissipate like ice crystals. They hang around sometimes for half a day or more, and they cover the sky with overcast that looks extremely unnatural, and it's solid particles, not ice that would just vaporize. And the guest said, well, I think it's very unlikely that it's already happening because the government hasn't told us anything about doing that. And the host was actually good at this point. He said, very unlikely that the government would be doing something that they didn't tell you about. And the guest was kind of stymied on that one. But this is the first thing, or possibly the first thing, that the off-planet observers would notice. And we should notice too. It should be like sharply in our vision that there's an actual chemical air raid where whatever country in the world you may be listening from, that's going on right over your head. And it may include sulfuric acid, but it is certainly not just that. We've had some of the top people on our Sunday show with the results of their analysis of the residue. And I know some of the people that Dane Wigington has talked to on geoengineeringwatch.org have said the same thing, although he focuses more on the weather control, the climate control aspect. It's much more than that. It is climate control, but it's also global poisoning. And Clifford Carnicom has done some great work on it, and he does acknowledge that it's got the three metals that people who know about these programs usually talk about, aluminum, barium, and strontium. But he points out that it's got a lot more than that stuff in it. The idea of reflecting heat away from the Earth is just one of many things that it's designed for. And it contains organisms that Carnicom really couldn't classify as any particular type of organism. He called them cross-domain bacteria because they weren't really like bacteria, but he didn't know what else to call them. They're in the recipe that's being dumped on our heads. Russ Tanner from GlobalSkywatch.com has been on the show more than once as well, and he's able to differentiate between the different types of recipes that they're using at different times and in different parts of the world. So it's a complex process that I certainly don't know what all the details in the agenda are, other than the fact that it's definitely poisoning the entire biosphere. It's pushing toward extinction of species. It's changing agriculture. It's making it impossible to have truly pure organic farming because it's all being treated with geoengineering poison. Doesn't mean that you should eat non-organic food. That's not the point. There are people that say, well, it's smoggy, so we should smoke, right? That's not good logic. Eating only organic food is like a baseline minimum. There are a lot of medical doctors who have found out that just eliminating all GMOs, which should be banned by every country, of course, but they own governments, as we know. Anyway, just by stopping the consumption of GMOs in any food that's not grown organically, people get over all kinds of diseases. Jeffrey Smith has talked about this a lot because a lot of his followers who are doctors have done this and their patients have recovered with no other changes. Just making sure to eat nothing that's not organic. But what I'm saying is the geoengineering compromises the baseline of what organic is, because it's dumping all this stuff on crops worldwide and on forests as well. Even if food is not grown there, clearly one of the objectives of the spraying is to make the fires that start in forests explosive now, like the recent ones in California, where they've been dumping explosive powdered metal on those forests for decades, and now they get to use it. And there's questions about how they detonate it. The theories vary on that. There's some indication that directed energy weapons have been used for igniting those fires, but once they burn, there's no question that they don't burn normally. They're much hotter. They burn high enough to melt steel and glass in some instances, like around Santa Rosa and Northern California, Paradise Fire, places like that. That's not normal. And it's clearly accelerants are being used to burn up areas like that, to be blamed on global warming. But because the agenda is complex, it also allows Agenda 21 to make progress, because often the fires like that are coordinated with rezoning, like they were in Santa Rosa, and then they make it impossible for some of the people to move back to the areas where they've been burned out. In fact, in Santa Rosa, they had many examples where the house had been just totally vaporized, and completely unnatural fires right 10 feet away were plants in plastic bottles that didn't even get warm enough to melt. And the house is like down to dust. And then they change the zoning and say, well, you can't come back and build the same house because, look, it's a dangerous fire area. Well, any place that's targeted is, of course, a dangerous fire area. So this spraying program is quite multi-directional, and it's accomplishing all these different objectives. But the amazing thing about it is that it's going on directly in front of everybody's eyes. And out of the whole population, almost no one realizes it. And of course, the ones that do realize it haven't figured out how to stop it yet. They're trying to tell people, mostly preaching to the choir, people who already understand it. But the visitors from another world somewhere would be just shocked, I think, about what's going on with that. They are effectively destabilizing the climate, so that is becoming more radical, unpredictable, changeable. And that has the benefit to the rulers that they create panic about climate change and global warming. And the more panic on our part about global warming and climate change, the better. They want people to be upset about those things, because the idea is they'd be willing to accept total control of their lives, following orders to do things that are self-destructive, and that's happening now. But the more panic, the better. And I think it's clear that they're not trying to mask global warming or climate change. They're trying to make it as scary as possible. They're even naming small rainstorms now as if they're, Category 5 hurricanes, so that you'll be afraid of any weather. I don't think that's by accident. So anyway, and the fires are being blamed on climate change. And in a way, as I told David on Alex's show, that was the case, that man-made climate change is absolutely real. But it's not because you use your air conditioner. It's because the people are up there paid for by you through taxes, and they're spraying these toxic metals and other ingredients all over the world, creating man-made climate change. And it should be a high priority to stop that. But I've been talking with state level officials and people in federal offices and even local offices, just looking for anybody that would be interested. And I haven't found anybody yet. Some say it's theoretically interesting, but there's nothing they can do. And it's the common element is that it's not their department, but they really wish you good luck in finding a way to deal with it. Anyway, I'll try to speed up here because I've got too much to cover, and even though it's early in the week, I have a lot that I wanted to share with you. The second thing that visitors from another benevolent, superior, wise race would notice is that the food system, since, in physical bodies we have to eat food, you may have noticed that. And there's a system that produces food for the billions of people on the earth. And the food system called agriculture is already poisoned by chemtrails, but it's also being poisoned by those growing the food. And I'm a supporter of farmers. I've been involved in agriculture since 1967 at least. But they've been educated. Again, we have the problem of the educational system. And there's a guy named Justus von Liebig, a chemical scientist in Germany, who's sometimes called the father of modern chemical agriculture. And what he discovered was that if you synthetically produce nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, just three chemicals, that you can make plants grow, and they'll grow faster and bigger and heavier than you could ever do by real farming, by taking care of the soil. Of course, they don't have much nutritional content. They're all completely messed up that way, but they're pretty impressive to look at. They may not taste good or smell good or anything, but they look, like they're really incredible. And he, like Pasteur, admitted his mistake before he died, but that didn't get any publicity. And the modern agricultural departments of governments and the people that are out there teaching farmers are teaching them, and thinking that they're doing a good thing for the most part, are teaching them that Liebig system of NPK agriculture is really great, and it's the usual cutting edge science, and it's going to feed the world and avoid starvation and all these things. Now they put GMOs on top of that too, but just the chemical fertilizer, that destabilizes the whole ecosystem of the soil, which is like a gigantic ecosystem, like a universe or something, full of living organisms. And as Egon said on Ghostbusters, spores, molds, and fungus, but it's more than that. The earthworms are there for the macro life, and there are what's called mycorrhizal fungi, which make bridges between the particles of minerals, like finely ground rock dust is the best one. That's what nature provides, especially after ice ages, but for a while after that too. And it makes a bridge between the rock dust particle and the root hair. And then the root hair absorbs the actual fungus, which includes protein, and it's got the protein hooked up with minerals, and it gets its full nutrition that way. And then when you eat that plant, or an animal eats the plant, it gets full nutrition and immunity and doesn't get bothered by disease, and the plant stays healthy. Well, not after it's eaten, but before that. And everything works the way it's designed to. So when you substitute NPK fertilization for agriculture, this is before the poison issue at all, it just ruins the quality of the plant life on that land and eventually destroys it. So because the plants get so weak with chemical fertilizer, then the insects and diseases come in to try to wipe out those plants so it doesn't ruin the species of plants with these unfit individuals being consumed and making everybody who eats them sick. It's a system in nature that actually works really well. But the poison companies come in and say, see, all the insects and diseases are coming and attacking the crops. And here's the arithmetic that figures out if we lose this percentage of the crop, then so many billion people in the world are going to starve. But we're going to save you because we manufactured all these poisons. And if you spray the poison on your food, and you have to be a scientist to really appreciate this, that you spray the poison on the food, and then you eat the food with the poison on it and in it, because you can't wash this poison off, you guys. The food, the vegetables and fruits and everything are permeable. So the poison saturates them to varying degrees. More, the softer ones more, of course, and the harder shelled ones less, but all of them to some degree. And then you eat that, and then you have world food sufficiency and everybody's happy. They are all dying from diseases from eating that food, but that's not their department. Agriculture would be doing great at that point, so that's what they're teaching in the colleges. And GMOs are just an escalation of that to a point that's unbelievable, and those should never have been allowed anywhere in the world. So in any case, well, one good thing, and I said good things were happening, remember, Bayer, this horrible company that provided nerve gas for the concentrations camps in World War II Germany, they bought Monsanto, who was often voted one of the most evil companies in the world for a very good reason, because they produced GMOs and then made believe they were safe. The GMOs themselves are deadly, which has been shown well now in animal studies and ignored by most of the world. But what they focused on is that the GMOs, a lot of them, the ones that are called Roundup Ready, are made so that you can spray weed killer on them. See, normally weed killer kills anything green, especially something strong like Roundup, glyphosate, technically. But if you genetically change the plant, change the genetic makeup at the cell level using other organisms, and you mix them all together in completely unnatural ways, they found some of them that don't get killed by weed killer, which they figure is wonderful, because then you can totally flood your crop, your food crop, with weed killer that gives everybody so many health problems that you couldn't even list them all. Cancer is one of them now. It's a completely satanic idea to even do this. But recently, courts in California have been convicting Monsanto of causing various people's cancer. And I think the third case just got decided in the favor of the plaintiffs. And they're trying to get a punitive damages award against Monsanto, but now Bayer, because Bayer is the owner of Monsanto, against Bayer for $2 billion. I think that would be great. I don't know if it'll stand up. It's being appealed. It'll probably get decreased, but in any case, there are thousands of people standing in line to, I know the fact checkers will say, well, they're false. They're not actually standing in a line. Yeah, I admit it, that they're just figuratively standing in line to file thousands of lawsuits, including class action lawsuits against Bayer. And hopefully they completely obliterate Bayer. And see, that's not good enough, though, because there's all these other companies involved in biotech, which is a horrible application of so-called science. Anyway, these visitors from off-planet would see what these supposedly, well, humans who think they're intelligent, that's why they call them humanoids, because they're not really showing any intelligence. They ruin this delicate web of life in the soil with chemical fertilizer, which is a disaster in itself. And then the problems that it causes with the weak plants, they say, well, we have to spray poison on our food before we eat it. That's not really an intelligent species. So that's another thing that they would notice. And similar to that, we're just stepping back for this overview this time. That's all we're talking about, because those are the things that we have to solve. This is not just to say how bad things are. That's a waste of time. This is to say, okay, this is what's happening. This is realistically what's around us. This is why there are some problems in our environment here, human and all other levels of the environment. And we need to be creative enough and actually maybe demonstrate some intelligence and solve it. And with the agriculture industry, it's the same with medical industry too, because the chemical fertilizers for plants, as we just went through, they're a lot like the dead, toxic, chemicalized food for the people and animals, because the improper feeding of the plants with chemicals makes them appear to need to be sprayed with poison to survive the attacks that they get from insects and from disease. And with people, it's just the same. The reason that we don't get it, one of the reasons is, well, one is we trust authority figures no matter what they say, no matter how ridiculous it is. If they have government approval and degrees, then we tend to believe it, which is a serious psychological problem that is potentially fatal for the whole species. But the other one is the time delay. Because, see, when you put chemical fertilizers on plants, it's not like the insects come 5 minutes later and just suddenly eat the plants, because if it was that quick, even we might recognize the connection. But it's a time delay, and it's blamed on something else. And with the medical and the food system, eating for years and years the toxic food for a while doesn't seem to do anything. And we get used to just not feeling that great all the time. But then after a while, it starts to show degeneration and allergies and susceptibility to infectious disease, for which microorganisms are blamed, not looking at the precursor. And it's the same with the plants that seem to need poison to survive and go to market. The humans seem to need drugs to cover up the symptoms of what is the result of lifestyle mistakes and eating poison junk food. So agriculture and the food and medical industry are very closely tied together. And it makes you wonder, how did the humans get to this degree of unconsciousness if we're really intrinsically these great conscious beings, willing to believe that poisoning your food and then eating it is smart or necessary, and that forgetting all about what Hippocrates said about do no harm, especially to doctors, and use food as your medicine. He said that too. And people are so asleep that we're living under this complex of mafias. We've got the medical mafia that kills doctors that break out of the trance and try to tell people the truth about these things. And the proven cures for all these supposedly incurable diseases are suppressed, with cancer and diabetes and everything else. The Bruce Cancer Cure, you can look that up, BREUSS, appears to have cured tens of thousands of people. He was in Austria, recently died. Dr. Gerson did a lot of great work, first in Germany and then in the U.S. after he immigrated here. The live food cure for diabetes, which is officially incurable, and it's been well demonstrated. Great video called Simply Raw, I think. It's a really good video. You might be interested in that, especially if you're involved with the whole diabetes thing. And Dr. Cousins, who was a guest on our show for over a year, every month, also wrote a book related to that called There is a Cure for Diabetes. All the great work of homeopaths and chiropractors and naturopaths, and especially the MDs who survived medical school with their common sense intact and came through and started telling the truth afterwards, they get silenced quicker than almost anybody. And if that information got out, Americans wouldn't have to keep paying more than $3 trillion a year to get sicker and more addicted to more medical drugs. It's happening all around the world. I'm trying to talk fast here because we're almost out of time. The energy mafia is very analogous to the medical mafia. Their job is to make sure that the clean and free energy technology sources that were developed and have been available for more than 100 years are believed to be a myth, that they're still going to take a long time to develop, and all this stuff that's not true. And take a look at the work of Dr. Stephen Greer on the internet. That's all free and available. His long talks are well worth listening to. And the energy mafia has to keep us believing that the guaranteed disaster of nuclear power that destroyed Chernobyl and Fukushima and could destroy the rest of the planet, and will eventually if it's not shut down, we have to believe that this is reasonable, that it keeps spreading. And in addition to the dirty and inefficient so-called fossil fuel energy sources, which are not necessary either, but they make great excuses for wars and for destroying the environment. War and pollution, basically both of those. And it's not the fault of any of us for using those dirty energy sources. Austerity is definitely not the answer. It's because they're the only ones being provided when the next generation has already been perfected. Another couple of mafias that we talked about, the environmental mafia is responsible to keep people panicked about global warming and climate change and believing that they have to stop using energy. That's the only way to save the world. You follow that to logical conclusion and you have to eliminate humans, right? And at the same time, toxic agriculture and toxic medicine are promoted along with putting untreated sewage on the soil. Mike exposed that in a great movie called Biosludged that I think is available free online right now if you look it up. I watched it. It's very interesting about how EPA, which is everybody believes that they're protecting you from environmental harm, right? They're promoting putting untreated sludge on the farmland, recycling it back into your body through the food system. And two more quick ones. The central banks and the fractional reserve banking system, their job is to make sure that the incredible wealth in every country never reaches the people. And they use mechanisms like inflation for doing that. And finally, the fake education system would just blow away the off-planet visitors, because the function of education now has become to make sure that you don't know how to think anymore, that you don't have common sense. And in fact, science really denigrates common sense as anecdotal and unscientific and subjective and totally worthless. They have people instead memorize acceptable information. So solutions are the issue. If those control systems are in place, and they are, and they're moving toward planetary extermination, we're the solution. We're walking around with containing the solution, and you have to do the work. You can't, if you really want to solve things, you can't tell other people to do it or just fight with other people and who have the wrong idea to prove that we're smarter and wasting our time like that. You need to start thinking, are you willing to do the work in yourself? Get your health back. Learn how to do that without drugs and other things like that. Stop eating and drinking poison and junk food. Start exercising the right way. Get sun and fresh air. Get the sleep you need. It sounds really simple, but it's powerful. That's when you rebuild, is during sleep. It's critical. You can't miss it. Learn to drop fear. Completely optional. The whole power structure is telling you to be terrified all the time by naming the rainstorms and everything else. That should tell you it's very important to drop fear. That's why they want you to live in it. Don't hate anybody, which they're also promoting race division and gender conflict and economic class conflict. That means that you shouldn't have that. Realize that everybody is us in another form. And the reason to have benevolence toward everybody else without exception is that that's what comes back to you, and it also helps them. So even the worst of the bad people, that's a treatment that we have to learn to give them instead of hate. And hate cuts you off from real consciousness and the power that you have that could turn this all around. So you want to drop it. Wish good for everybody, even the worst people. And it makes your words and actions stronger. So if you're an activist and you want to become effective, do the work inside yourself, and it'll totally change what happens. Don't lose hope. The power inside you is the cure and the solution. It's not impossible at all. It's available. It's just that if we never look at it and never take it seriously, it might as well be unavailable. So that decision is totally yours. You don't have to wait on experts. You don't have to wait on government permission. You don't have to wait on some scientist to tell you the new breakthrough. You've got 100% potential to transform your own life completely. If you want to get into more detail, visit us at planetaryhealingclub.com, and we're there every week, live, interactive. If you're interested, we'd love to see you there. Otherwise, hope you have a good week, and hope everything goes well for you. And I'll look forward to seeing you here next time. See you then.